Hi, I'm Angela Kohnen. I'm one of the co-authors of the book From Page Science. I'm a former high school English teacher, a pilot teacher in the Sojourn Project, and I'm currently a professor and researcher. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've learned from the project about writing and editing and responding to student work. And in particular, I'll summarize a few of the studies I've done. Some of this information appears in the book, but a lot of it is an extension of my thinking since the book has come out. So one of the first things that I did was analyze the way teachers responded to sample student articles before they were involved in Sojourn training at all, and compare that with the way an editor would respond to that same writing. And what I found was pretty interesting. Most of the teachers involved in my research were science teachers, and yet they seemed to really fixate on grammar and typos and spelling errors and things that we might consider mechanics. To an extent that the editor did not. The editor I was using, he rarely commented on such things. A second tendency that the teachers had was to treat the writing not as if it were an article, a potential science news story, but as if it were an assessment of really specific science content. And they would mark on these articles when content was incorrect, basically with an X, as if it were some kind of test and they could see, oh, the students didn't know it. There was not an awareness that this could be revised or built into a news story with some corrections, but more that this was kind of a done deal. The final thing that I noticed was how vague or general the comments that teachers did write on papers were. They would be very vague questions for more information. Could you find more about X or Y or Z? But pretty vague. Or they would be equally vague compliments. Good job. Nice start. I did not see that kind of response from the editor. In contrast, from the editor, what I tended to see was topic being central to all of his responses. His responses hinged on what the topic of the article was. If the topic was really strong, the editor would make much more specific comments, much more expansive comments. If the topic was weak, and by weak, we're still working to define what that means, but often it would be very broad, unmanageable in a 500-word article, or in some other way unsuitable for a science news story, the editor would make a quick comment about the topic not being worthwhile. One of his favorite questions was, why did you choose this? Because sometimes that would elicit a response that would make a much more interesting science news story than what was on the page. So topic was key for the editor in a way that it wasn't for teachers. Also, likewise, audience was key. So all the comments that the editor made were through the lens of the editor being proxy for the reader, and he was highly aware that he was responding to science news stories. So information, the order of information was important. The questions an audience member might have were very important, and a lot of his comments were framed through the eyes of the audience. And finally, he was very direct. Rather than being vague, he would say, you need to know how many people have died from lung cancer. You need to look at epa.gov for this particular information. So the comments were very clear, direct, and always about content, never about grammar, typos, or things of that nature. So when I think about these comparisons, I think, okay, so what can a teacher learn from that? And I think one thing that we can take from this is a hierarchy of concerns when we pick up student papers. And that's something that the SAFE and the writing standards, the Sojourn criteria, are designed to help teachers address. Start with the most important things, topic being the number one. Topic mattering so much is an idea that I continue to think about and want to research. Students with good topics, and good from both the student's perspective in that the student is highly engaged and motivated to understand the topic, but also good from an audience perspective, that match there really can lead to some powerful writing and some students that are invested in a process that can take a really long time compared to many school assignments. The other thing that a lot of our teachers have learned from working with a professional editor is how acceptable it is to be direct in student comments, to tell a student, here's a website to visit, here's a particular piece of information you need to find. Many teachers were afraid to be so direct and wanted to frame in a very open and questioning kind of way, to leave it up to the student to make the final decision. And sometimes when we're learning, we need someone to tell us exactly what to do, and that's what the editor was able to do. A second area that I get asked about a lot is if our SciGen standards or criteria don't include anything about writing really, then how do students learn how to write, how to make a science news article, and how do teachers help them? And I think that in my observations and interviews and work with teachers, I found that teachers find a lot of different ways to get the students to revise articles that are publishable. And one technique that's used in most of the classrooms is conversations and conferences, peer conferences, teacher small group conferences. And we see this conversation around the writing really pushing students and pushing their writing forward. And these conversations about science topics that are open and authentic conversations, the teacher usually doesn't know the answer either, that are rich and powerful experiences for the students and do advance their writing. I also think, likewise, students who have an opportunity to publish and who have a sense of audience, and the audience being their peers who perhaps don't know much about this topic, this actually impacts their writing much more than a teacher rubric could. You see the students thinking when I interview them, talking about, well, I had to make this really clear for my peers because they haven't done the research that I have. And very rarely in schools do we have such an authentic audience and opportunity for students. So making that a crucial part of the assignment and the revision and the work that students do, I think really helps with the writing. And finally, I'm back to that direct feedback. Teachers who give really pointed and direct feedback about where paragraphs need to go or where more information is needed or how a news article should be structured are getting some better results than teachers who are a little more hands-off about it. This direct feedback can also be in conjunction with read-alouds, as we emphasize elsewhere. The study of models, looking constantly at what's already been published, can help students get a sense of what these things sound like, because oftentimes they haven't been exposed to a lot of science news or really any kind of journalism. And then finally, my final thought has to do with value systems. One thing that I keep coming back to in my own work with pre-service teachers in English, not even in science, but is the idea that what you respond to in a piece of writing conveys your values and your priorities as a responder. And when we think as teachers involved in SciGen, what matters about this piece of writing? What is important? And when we add a layer of that on, the authenticity of this project, the opportunity for real publication, the opportunity to communicate with peers, what matters? What's important? And if we can keep saying that to ourselves every time we pick up another piece of student writing, because sometimes we get lost in what can often seem like a jumbled, half plagiarized, not all the way thought through combination of ideas. And we've all had students turn in work that is less than lovely. To keep in mind, okay, what's important, what matters, what matters to the genre of science news, but what also matters to my classroom, what matters to the student in their learning. One set of values that teachers keep bringing to their responses to student writing that I think really resonates is, what sources have you turned to? Who represents credible sources of information on science topics, on important science topics, and how can we help students understand that and own that and turn to that? So comments might be really directed at sources of information. So kind of keeping that in the back of our minds every time we pick up a paper, I think really can help make the process go more smoothly. And remembering that students can only really work on a couple things at a time. And just to stop there, back to the hierarchy of concerns. So I continue to find this project extremely fascinating, and I'll continue to learn from it, and I hope that more and more teachers and students can become involved.